Good morning, everyone. The webinar will begin in just a few minutes. While waiting, I do encourage you to download the handout that's available under the Handouts tab on the control panel. It does summarize today's presentation. While we wait for the webinar to begin, we do have Mike Rooney with us. Good morning, Mike. Since the pandemic, many teams have started working remotely. Do you believe it's more difficult to motivate and engage remote workers, and are there different approaches needed?
Patrick, that's a good question in today's world. It's really a matter of perspective, and it ties a lot to relationships, the relationship between, in this case, the direct report and their supervisor or manager. And it takes some extra effort because we're not necessarily having that in-person one-on-one, but I think the fundamentals are still in place. The fundamentals that we'll cover today, particularly when we talk about really knowing your employees, and it relies heavily on dialogue, which we can still do remotely. We just have a little extra challenge because we're not face to face in person.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's probably there are some different approaches when people are working remotely and maybe not working non-traditional hours, or working outside of the norm, the normal 8 to 5.
Yeah, we're definitely working different hours, and there's even some research out there that says people are working more hours when we're working remotely because things are so easily accessible. But with the advent of things like Zoom and Teams and the other platforms out there, we do have, that is those are great tools to really get closer to the in-person face-to-face communication, because at least we have a visual. So there is some body language and emotional things that we can pull into the conversation, which I think are also key to motivation.
Yeah. Yeah. I was reading some articles about what you had just mentioned. People are actually working more hours. 'Cause now they don't have the commute. So they're actually start working at 8 o'clock, if not earlier. All they have to do is commute to their home office and turn their computer on. They don't have the drive in. So yeah, I've read a lot of people start earlier and actually work later.
And it's going to be interesting as this continues. We talk about balancing home and work life, and it'll be interesting to see how things pan out. Because you think about people logging in on their computers at home, and it's no big deal just to leave your computer plugged in, logged in, and you may get a late evening request, and it's convenient, it's easy. So will we be risking more of that off balance between work and home life? That I'm curious to see how that plays out as we come out of the pandemic stuff.
Right. So again, we're almost right at time. So while we are waiting, again, there is a handout available for everybody. Please download that, and we're going to get started here in just a few seconds.
Countdown to kickoff. Looks like we have a fair amount of people logging in, which is great.
Yeah.
Appreciate everybody joining us this morning.
Yeah.
And
So yes,
morning.
it is. So we are right at time. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Motivating and Engaging Employees. Since we want to continue to deliver these informational webinars for you and practice social distancing, we are delivering this webinar remotely. Your presenter, Mike Rooney, will be presenting from his office and me from mine. My name is Patrick Allen. I'm the program manager for Kent State's Center for Corporate and Professional Development's public open enrollment programs. Our center specializes in providing employee development for partnering organizations in Northeast Ohio and around the world. We offer a training as both public open enrollment programs currently being delivered live and virtually via Zoom, and also customized programs delivered live and virtual at your location. We are starting to deliver some in-person training, so if you're interested in that, you can just let us know about that. I am joined today by Kent State Facilitator Mike Rooney. I will be serving as your host, and Mike will be our presenter for today. Mike is a results-oriented Toyota production system manufacturing professional with a unique blend of experience, skills, and education. With over 30 years of internal corporate experience, he held leadership positions in operations, continuous improvement, human resources, and engineering. Mike's continuous improvement and talent management consulting roles provided him experience both domestically and internationally in a variety of manufacturing facilities serving automotive, aerospace, and industrial markets. Mike is skilled with motivating, teaching, coaching, and developing key personnel at both the individual and group levels. Mike holds a Bachelor of Science in Industrial Engineering from the University of Dayton, an MBA from Baldwin Wallace University, and a Master's in Organizational Development from Bowling Green State University. Additionally, Mike is a DDI certified master trainer, and he was also published in Organization Development Journal for his work in blending organizational development and continuous improvement. For Kent State, Mike facilitates programs such as motivating employees, managing discipline, and also a leadership development program. Everyone in attendance today has been muted to avoid background noise from any of the nearly 100 registered participants. We do encourage you to ask questions at any point during the hour. You can submit your questions in writing to me using the questions tab on the control panel on the right side of your screen. I will present your questions to Mike as time permits throughout the webinar. Again, there is a handout that's available to you that summarizes today's presentation. It's located under the Handouts tab on the control panel, and we encourage you to download it and take notes during today's presentation. We are recording today's webinar, and you will receive an email early next week with a link to the recording after we conclude our time together. And now I'd like to introduce Mike Rooney.
Awesome. Thank you, Patrick. Appreciate the introduction, and I appreciate all the attendees out there for joining us today on this topic, a topic that is near and dear to my heart. And so I just want to start off today with just a little bit of background about where we're going to go. And today's really about just doing some exploration, if you will, into motivation. And we'll really take it beyond the idea of financial. Oftentimes, as I've done this session with groups before, the first thing that comes into mind for them in terms of motivation is money. And we spend a fair amount of time talking about that and really trying to look at is that the only motivator, which as you'll see from today, it certainly is not. And so we'll look at ways beyond just money. From an outcome perspective, really looking to recognize that we're all unique individuals, and there's a critical aspect of motivating our employees, and that is getting to know them. And I mean getting to know them as individuals and very deeply and personally. We'll also want to expose you to some different frameworks to help you in terms of getting to know your employees. And again, we'll look at ways beyond pay, and we'll support that with a bit of foundational theory and motivation. Not a theory discussion, but at least we'll throw it out there so that we can see how that fundamentally supports the foundation of the topics that we'll cover today, and also make that connection into performance management. So I'll kind of flow through this from just a discussion around what really motivation is and why it's important. We'll shift into knowing your employees, and then we'll touch into the motivational theory that I've called exploring motivation. So that's our roadmap for today. And with that, one of the things when we talk about engaging our employees, and engagement has been a hot topic for years and a real challenge for organizations, and especially today, as Patrick mentioned in our pre-call conversation about with all the remote working we have going on today with the pandemic. Engaging our employees is a challenge. And as I try to share in this relatively simple graphic, that motivation is one key element, and the other one I contend is trust. As leaders, we have to not only be able to motivate, but we also have to have that trust that our employees show in us. And those two pieces together help us to bring about the engagement of our employees. And so one of the things I like to do with folks is just take a step back, and if we think about the different people who have influenced our own motivation in life and all the paths that life has taken us, people that could be family members. Oftentimes we reflect on how our parents, our mom or our dad, influenced our motivation. Sometimes it's friends, it's teachers, it's coaches, it could even be bosses. the point is, it's not just about work-related folks who have motivated us or influenced our own motivation over time, but folks outside of work as well. And if we think about what those people do, what did they do to cause me to be motivated? It often uncovers some very interesting points about ourselves. And I think about one individual in my life who was, she was actually a professor, but I also considered her a coach, which is how I got to know her. And she really interacted with me on a way that forced me to reflect. She asked me lots of questions. She didn't answer any of my questions because she really made me think and answer my questions. And that motivated me to learn more on the behavioral side and figure out how that applies in my different leadership roles across the manufacturing organizations that I worked in. And I also contend that we can see when others are motivated if we really take the time to observe. And, we may see, if I think back in my past, folks on my team who were oftentimes maybe not organized, and things were not being done on time, a little bit loose, and then they might be working on a different project and everything is spot on. All the I's are dotted, T's are crossed, the project goes off without a hitch. And that really is a sign that that type of work is motivating to them. They're energized. And so the behaviors can come with motivation. And we as leaders, if we take that time to observe and listen and really pay attention to what's going on around us with others, we can see when others are motivated. So just some thought provokers there as we talk about motivation. And if we look at motivation definitionally, if that's a word, from a definition standpoint, excuse me, my mouse was a little touchy, but if we look at it from a definitional standpoint, one definition that I have up on the screen is that motivation is the desire to act in service of a goal. And the second definition I have up there is that scientists define motivation as your general willingness to do something. So there's a willingness in there to take on some action or some behavior. And in terms of the first one really references a goal, so something that we are shooting for and we're looking to achieve, whether that be a personal goal or a work-related goal of some objective that our leaders have set out for us. But I really like these two definitions because they also bring in an aspect of motivation around it being a choice, which I will touch on more in a little bit when we get into some other aspects. So we can really learn, that going back to that desire or that willingness, we can think about and really identify and learn what are some of those things that motivated us. So, whether it's a challenge or it may be internal, it may just be pride, the pride of doing a good job, the pride of people recognizing that our work is good work, or it could be just that desire to help others. On the flip side, another thing that can cause us to be motivated is avoiding a negative impact. If we think back to when we were growing up as kids, we often did our chores and we did the things that our parents expected of us in order to avoid some form of punishment, whether it was being grounded or having something taken away from us, such as TV time, or in today's world, that could even be phone time. So the challenge, whether it's challenge or internal pride, those things can actually be motivators for us, or things that we experience that really cause us to be motivated. And it's really an interesting debate. I often pose this questions to groups of, can you motivate others? And obviously there's two sides to that question. And one side is the yes, you can motivate others. Obviously the other side is no, you cannot motivate each other or motivate others. And so on the yes side, we think about rewards. We think about compliments. We can think about purposeful work or even a challenge. And so for those who would be on the yes side of that debate, yeah, if we reward people for good work, and whether that be time off or whatever is important to that individual, that reward can be motivating. But on the flip side of that, the no's would argue that, you know what, you really can't motivate others. It's their choice. It's an individual choice. But I would contend that on the no side, what you're really doing as a leader is you're creating that environment. You're creating the environment that is motivational for the individuals in your group. And I saw a recent video with Simon Sinek where he was actually talking about this very question. And that was one of the things that really came out of that video that really hit home for me, is that as leaders, we're really creating that environment. And so in order to create that environment, it becomes very important for us to understand and know our employees. And so regardless of whether you're in the yes camp or the no camp, there are a couple of types of motivation that I want to share. And they're shown on the screen here. The first is extrinsic, the second is intrinsic. And very simply, I think of extrinsic as the external things and intrinsic as the internal things. So on the extrinsic side, it goes back to that reward or avoiding a punishment. We try to do a good job at work because we're avoiding losing our job. We try to do a good job to earn a reward that may be a promotion. It may be some exposure, or maybe it's just an award, a public recognition that I did a good job and I was really successful with a project. On the intrinsic side, it's really more of a, it's personally rewarding to me. It's something that I do just because it makes me feel good. It is something that I enjoy. And for me, I think about things like on the intrinsic side, things like just listening to music. Music can really set my tone. Music can help me be calm and think and be reflective, as well as can be energized. Going into, say, an interview or even a presentation, I may play a different set of music than I would if I'm just going into a quiet time. I like to spend time out on the water because it's relaxing. It's not that there's any physical reward for it or anything like that. It's just that internal piece. And as we get to know our employees, it's critical or important to understand what not only extrinsically motivates them, but also what intrinsically motivates them. And so I think and here's some examples, a couple that I mentioned. Again, I spent years when my kids were growing up coaching sports. And so on the extrinsic side, they're playing in a tournament and they're playing to win because they want that trophy. As we used to say, they want that hardware. Again, as a child, we were doing our chores to avoid being grounded or getting in trouble with our folks. On the intrinsic side, it's exercise, it's listening to music. For me, it's being out on the water. Just because I enjoy being out on the water, it creates a calm and a peace for me. So again, it's critical that we understand the individuals that we have responsibility for, so that we can appropriately create that environment that is motivating for them. So I think we have a polling question coming up. And yes, there it is. And so the polling question that I have there, and Patrick, I think you'll run this.
Yep.
Which of the following are examples of extrinsic, or as I like to say, external motivators? And you can see a few choices up there. So I'd like to get some feedback on where the audience is on this.
Okay, I'll go ahead and launch it now. And as it states, you can select all that apply.
Great.
So go ahead and vote, and I will let you know the results here shortly.
Awesome. Yeah, I think oftentimes when we talk about motivation, the first thing that comes to mind is these extrinsic type of things. Some are very common, some are more common than others, but I'd be interested to see what the perspective is of the audience that we have out there today.
Mm-hmm. Okay, votes are coming in. Just a few more seconds and I'm going to close it.
Awesome.
Okay, it looks like just about everybody has voted. So let's see it. At 50%, it's all of the above. Excuse me. Followed by 40%, the $100 gift card.
Okay.
27% driving the speed limit. 20% at saving enough money for a down payment on your first house.
Interesting. Very interesting. So we had some all the above as well as some individuals. And if we really think about that, even when we were talking back about definitionally, that word that I not even sure if it's a word, but I use it a lot. That $100 gift card is that reward, and so that one definitely fits. And if we think about the speed limit, we're avoiding that getting a ticket. Is that really extrinsic or is it intrinsic? That ticket that in the end may cost us some amount of money, whether it's $50 or $100, depending upon how fast we're going. That could certainly be an extrinsic example. So when we look at all of those, I would contend that all three of those are extrinsic and would fall back on the all of the above answer for that one. So I appreciate everybody's input on that one. And again, we could probably come up with a list of who knows countless numbers of examples of other extrinsic motivators. So I appreciate the input. So with those basic concepts about motivation, I'd like to shift into a little bit of perspective on application in our day-to-day life. And so this is where as I mentioned earlier, it's really about getting to know your employees, and we need to really understand what motivates them. And the key here is, as I share with audiences and work with different organizations, is that what motivates me does not necessarily motivate my employees or my team. And I had a personal example not too long ago where I was talking with a younger individual in her mid to late 20s, and she was sharing with me how she was having a conversation with her leader at the time, and her boss said, I could really see you as being the HR director and eventually the VP of HR, and think about all the money that you'll be making a great salary. You could do this, you could do that. And she looked at him and said, it's not necessarily what I want to do. And this gentleman looked at her like with, as she said, like I had three heads. And he's like, well, what do you mean? It's about moving up. It's about making more money. And she said, that's not what drives me. It's really in my HR position. To me, what drives me is helping people. I'm not in it for becoming the next VP of HR. And so it was a really interesting example in that the leader was taken aback because what obviously motivated him was that idea of progressing and moving up the promotional ladder and the financial rewards that come with that. And yet here was an individual who was not motivated by that. So that example again was fairly recent for me, and I just really appreciated what it brought to the conversation about motivation, and recognizing that what motivates me does not necessarily motivate my people or the people on my team. And I simply say it as I is not equal to we. So when we think about that in terms of knowing our employees, there's a framework that I often use, and it's out there. It's called the skill will framework, and it's one way to think about our employees and get to know them. And if we think about where they are in terms of skill and will, which is what the matrix tries to frame for us, this framework, on the vertical axis, we see will from low to high going bottom to top. And on the horizontal axis, we see skill from low to high going left to right. And so as we think about our folks in different quadrants, that could help us to understand potential ways to motivate. So I'll take a couple of examples. If we think about someone, if I go to the, let's just go the bottom right quadrant, high skill, low will. Somebody that's very skilled at what they do, but boy, they just don't seem like, they want to get the work done, or they're just, you just see that no energy in them. And so the question there is really trying to shift them in an upwards direction. And this really applies not just to the motivation, but also to how we coach our employees. So the person's got the skill. So things like training and skill building and things of that nature are not necessarily going to shift them vertically. So the key hot button, if you will, for someone in the lower right quadrant is really understanding, as I like to call them, what are their hot buttons? What's important to them? It could be that they're bored and they need a challenge. So you throw a challenge at them because they have the skill, and now you can see a shift for them vertically in terms of will or motivation. If we look at somebody that is, let's go top left quadrant, which is a fun one, low skill, high will, I often think of those folks perhaps as our new employees. They're new to the company, they got this new job, they're excited, but they just don't understand the job or the company yet. And so if we think about them not understanding or knowing the job yet, we're trying to shift them to the right in terms of skill. So that's where things like education, skill building, and so forth can help to create that motivation and cause that shift. So I throw this out there as a framework, if you will, in terms of how we might influence the motivation of our employees. And I think, I have some further examples. If we look at that from a leader's perspective, the low skill, low will, it may also be a confidence piece where they need to develop their skills so they build confidence in their ability to perform the tasks or the requirements, and that starts to shift them. And then we look at what's important to them. If you look at somebody that's high skill, low will, like we were talking, part of that can be sharing the why. Why is this work important? And not just important to the organization, but also important for the individual. And the low skill, low skill, high will, again, that's teaching, coaching, giving them feedback, helping them grow. And then the high skill, high will, which I would contend that a lot of us would love to have all around the patch. Challenge them, and in essence, as a leader, just get the heck out of the way. Let them go. And that can be challenging in itself as a leader. So in addition to that framework, as leaders, we should also be aware of how our expectations can motivate or even demotivate our employees. And so expectations need to be clear, and we need to make sure that we, as well as our folks, have the same understanding in terms of what our expectations are and align with where they are in terms of that skill will framework. So we should definitely challenge our employees, but be realistic. And folks often use the SMART acronym or acrostic for that. I think that one's been played out quite a bit, but I think just fundamentally be clear in terms of what our expectations are, and think about different expectations for yourself. What types of expectations get you fired up and energized? Do you like very objective expectations? Here's the number, hit this number by this date, or more subjective, drive improvement in this area, drive a change. Are you outcome oriented or process oriented? Is it about the how or the what? Do you prefer fixed type of expectations or flexible? Again, you think back to a year or so ago, who would have expected that we'd have been hit with this COVID and pandemic? And if we had very fixed objectives, boy, that could very well demotivate our folks, because now the world is turned upside down. And, we need to have some flexibility. So not only the expectations from your own viewpoint in terms of what type of expectations motivate you, but understanding what type of expectations motivate your team or your folks. Which takes us to a second polling question. And the question is, as you see on the screen, which of the following are key components of effective expectations? And you can see 5 choices there. And again, another opportunity to select all that apply. Patrick, if you would launch that.
Okay, just launched it.
And we could spend a whole day just on expectations. It's a critical piece, ties into all of our leadership roles, and all of these are connected with a red thread, if you will, around effective communications and how we communicate with our employees. But as we lay out expectations, what are the key components? So I'm curious to see what your perspective is.
So again, you can choose all that apply, and give you just a few more seconds. It looks like we've had the majority of the participants voting. So, okay, I'm going to close it. And wow, we got a pretty wide range. So at 90%, it's the expected result. 83% realistic chance of being achieved. At 76%, both the why and how we will measure the results. And 72% is the due date.
Interesting. Yeah, not surprising in the results. The one thing I often see is one of them that falls down low, which I'll touch on in just a second. But the expected result and the realism or realisticness, if that's a word, behind that are two that often just about always jump out for folks. You think about setting an expectation, and we're both clear in a dialogue with our employees, we're both clear on what the expected result is. But if that employee says, you know what, no matter how hard I work, how many days I put in, how many hours I put in, there's no way I'm going to get there, we're going to demotivate that person. We're going to take away some of that motivation. So both of those, the expected result as well as the realism behind it, are key components. The due date, that one sometimes falls off lower because, again, that ties back to, do you like expectations that are flexible or fixed? We were very big in my past experience about do what by when. So the by when was very important to us. And, again, I think it's a critical part of the expectation in terms of, if you think about going back to give an individual feedback about their performance, and, I expected it to be done by this date, and we're having a conversation and the employee says, well, I didn't think it was due until later in the year. So I think that's also a critical piece. I'm going to jump down to the one about measuring results. I think that is organizationally and culturally dependent. And I've seen in my past where, depending upon which data system I went to, I could get different results. And so I think it's important up front in that scenario that we both are clear on how we're going to measure results. So we don't end up in some debate about, well, my data says we achieved and your data says we didn't achieve. Let's just get that out of the way up front. So the one I skipped, which I was a little surprised that it came back higher, the 70%, and that's pleasantly surprised, is the why. I've often found out in my career that we forget to share with folks the why. Why is it important? And again, important not only from the organization's perspective, but also from the individual's perspective. And when I say the individual's perspective, we may be giving them an assignment or a project because it's about developing a skill in them, which aligns with their desired career path or career growth. So I would contend that all of those apply, and I appreciate the feedback and the polling responses from everybody. And so again, this is just kind of a repetitive picture of what we just covered. So with expectations in place, our approach to how we manage performance can also be a motivator or demotivator, and it can impact that motivation of the individuals. And so when we think about how we do performance management, which again could be a whole nother all-day conversation, are we assessing against very clear and understood expectations, tying back to the comments made earlier? And then just the way in which we give feedback. There are effective ways to give feedback, and there are very ineffective ways to give feedback. And when I say feedback, it's both positive and constructive. Some folks like to call it positive and negative, whatever word fits for you. But the way we give feedback and how we deliver that to individuals is important. And then sometimes those are very difficult conversations. So the way in which we handle difficult conversations is also an impactor to how well we motivate or how much we demotivate our employees. And so let's shift from the expectations piece now and the performance management piece into a broader view of what employees want, and just share with you briefly some research and articles that I have found out there, and there's plenty out there, but some that I find rather interesting. And this one, granted, it's a few years dated. It's in 2014, but it just really prompts some good discussion when I bring this up in front of folks. But this was a Forbes article several years ago, and the question was, what motivates you to excel and go the extra mile? The thing that I want to, and you can see down below it, is that the top listings, I think there's 10 in that list, and you can see their percentages. And to me, the key takeaways from this is things that jump out for me are that the top 3 there are really intrinsic motivators. They're not the extrinsic that we talked about earlier. And in this particular case, money shows up as being relatively low on the list. You know, it's a 7% kind of number. So I find that just to be an interesting perspective of data out there. And I think that shifts over time. And when I bring that piece up around time, you know, here was some research done by a psychologist about money being a motivator. And she contends that it is a motivator of employee productivity, but it's a very complicated relationships. In essence, it can motivate some people under some conditions. And those conditions that she posits in front of us are fourfold. One, money needs to be important to the employee. So I go back to my example of earlier. It wasn't important to that particular person. The employee must perceive the money as being a direct reward for performance. It's not just money that's thrown at them for some unknown or arbitrary reason. And they must perceive the marginal amount to be significant. So if I worked really hard on a project for 6 months and the amount of money thrown at me is something like $100, that may not be significant. And then, of course, within the organization, having that discretion to be able to reward the employees with different amounts of money is also a factor in terms of money being a motivator. So I find that to be an interesting set of research as well. And then lastly, there was one talking about, from 2019, talking about a tight job market, and that giving away stacks of money is not always the best. And based on the research, that employees were really looking for autonomy and wanting to be competent and having a sense of belonging, all of which again goes back to intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation. So I think it reinforces the point or the mode of, you know, we really got to think about intrinsic as well as the extrinsic. And I think fundamentally we often go to extrinsic at first. So even with that research and all the other research, you know, the bottom line is we've got to know our employees. And the question becomes, how? You know, how do we get to know our employees? And I'll pop up just a few bullet points. You know, as I mentioned earlier, we've got to listen to our folks, have conversations and dialogue, and listen and observe their behaviors. Ask questions about what's important to them. I would even contend as a leader, share what motivates you, what excites you, what causes you to get up in the morning and be excited to come to work. And then try different things. And you got to keep it fresh as you begin to try different motivators. Change it up, mix it up, try different things. Not everything is going to work perfectly. Or again, you'll find out that this approach motivated Tom and Mary, but it didn't motivate Sue. Okay, so we try a different approach. Again, it goes back to people being individuals. And so as we think about this practical application, I just want to touch a little bit on motivational theory that I think is foundational to all of this. And the first piece of that is one that goes back many, many years, and I think it still applies. Again, it's foundational to all the current research, but you know, Maslow's 5 levels of needs, and he talks about the pyramid, if you will, going from bottom to top: physiological security, social esteem, and self-actualization. And, you know, starting at that bottom, it's about the basics, you know, food, shelter, clothing, putting a roof over our heads, providing for our family, providing for ourselves. And then the security set of needs. When we think about security, it's not just physical safety and security, but it's also emotional safety and security. When you think about your organization, and is it okay to say no to the boss? Is it okay to challenge the boss? You know, where is your organization in that regard? And people need to feel safe and secure in doing that, as well as, again, the physical safety and security. And having worked in manufacturing for all the years that I did, physical safety was a critical driver, or a critical value in our organization. We wanted everyone to go home from work in the same condition, maybe a little bit more tired, but in the same condition that they came to work. Moving up the pyramid, we look at social. And again, that's that need to belong, to be part of something bigger and have those relationships. Then esteem is simply feeling good about yourself. You know, that's that pride piece that I mentioned earlier. Being proud of the work that you do, being proud of your accomplishments and the role that you carry in the organization. And then last and certainly not least, self-actualization, being able to realize your full potential, whatever that potential is. And organizations handle that potential differently. They look at it differently, but it's about, here's where I want to be in 5 years in my career, or in 10 years. The simple the simple thought about here's what I want to be when I grow up, that relates to self-actualization and how individuals achieve that self-actualization and potential that they want to achieve. And so looking at this, fundamentally, people are carrying these different needs. And if you did some research, or some research is probably too strong of a word, but maybe it's surveys around what really energizes or what's important to your folks, I would contend that you're going to find them spread across every one of these different levels of needs. And they're dependent upon many, many factors, but all of them come to play. In addition to that fundamental research, this is just a snapshot to show that different folks continue to try to refine that research over time. You see Maslow on the left, Herzberg in the middle, McClelland on the right, and it's people just continuing to try to refine that research. And Maslow looks at those needs as being higher order and lower order needs, and Herzberg then starts to refine it into motivational factors versus hygiene factors. And then the third look to the far right is really just breaking it down into people have a need to achieve, a need for power, and a need to be affiliated with something else, something bigger. So again, it's continued refinement of that foundational motivational theory that supports how we go after looking at motivation for our employees. The other foundational theory, and one that I've relied on throughout my career and throughout my life, is known as the expectancy theory. And expectancy posits in front of us that there's three key beliefs that drive motivation. And the interaction between those three beliefs is what really is I won't call it secret sauce, but it's key. And so there's three fancy words down the left: expectancy, instrumentality, and balance. And when I first became exposed to this many years ago, I struggled with those three words. And so I look more at the words to the right. And expectancy refers to the notion that if I put in the effort, if I work hard, I will hit that expected performance. I'll hit that goal. I'll get that outcome. Instrumentality refers to if I hit that goal, if I get that expected performance, I will be rewarded, recognized. And then third, which is balance, that reward is of value to me. So if I play those three together, if I work hard, if I put in the effort, I'm going to hit that goal, get that performance. And if I get that performance, I'll be rewarded. And that reward is of value to me. And so when we think about that last one, the reward is of value to me, even sometimes a simple public appreciation of, hey, Mike did a really good job on this project, I think we should all give him a round of applause, that may be very valuable to me. Other folks may find that to be embarrassing. They don't want to be publicly recognized. And so for the mathematical brained folks in the room today, we turn this into a formula at the bottom where motivation is what the M is, equals the product of expectancy times instrumentality times balance. And if we all go back to our math classes, what happens to motivation if any of the three, expectancy, instrumentality, or valence, what happens to motivation if any of those three are 0? Well, mathematically, motivation would be 0. So we're putting motivation at risk if we miss any of those three. So the expectancy, instrumentality, or valence, if we miss any of those three, we put the motivation at risk. So that one, again, I've fallen back on throughout my career, and it has really, really grounded me and helped me as I've worked with different organizations and different groups of employees. So with that in mind, another thing that I always find interesting to have a dialogue or conversation with folks about is thinking about the question of, is motivation something we learn, or is it something that is just we're born with, it's in us? Is it learned, or is it innate? And the dialogue tends to be very enlightening as we have this with different groups. And there's different thoughts out there, and some of them are even theories. But if I look at the last one, it says world-class achievers are driven to improve, but they didn't start out that way. We've seen that passion develops rather than emerging suddenly. And again, if you look at some of the other theories that are shown on the screen, some would, instinct theory says it's biologically based. And it's because there are certain behaviors that help in our survival. Goes back to fight or flight. Incentive, we make choices that maximize those good feelings, that pleasure, or minimize the pain. And then there's drive. People are driven to behave excuse me, in certain ways to reduce that internal tension or stress, because there's certain things that we're not meeting for ourselves. But the bottom line is that motivation is very complicated and complex, and no one theory explains it in its entirety. Again, I go back to, we've got to know our employees. It's very individually based, and we need to understand our people, what energizes them, what fires them up, what gives them the passion, if you will, to drive forward and meet whatever challenge or goal is put in front of them. Excuse me, my mouse again is sensitive. So as a leader, to bring it home to some practical application, and we think about when we go back to we go back into the fray of our semi-normal everyday life, here's some things you can think about relative to what you can do as a leader to motivate or create the environment that will motivate your employees. Spend time with them, find out what motivates them. And I don't mean just walk up to them and say, hey, Mary, what motivates you? Because you'll find that oftentimes when I just ask that question directly, people's faces freeze like a deer in the headlights. And so it's more about listening to, maybe a conversation about, how was your weekend? Oh, my son had a tournament this weekend and it was great. We played 5 games, and so you start to find out that family time is important to them. And so you can discern from those conversations and those dialogues what gives them energy, what's important to them, and that ties right into their motivation. Provide them the support, the resources that they need to do their work, and to do it well. Praise or compliment. Again, we have to be careful with praise or compliment often, because sometimes those can become worn out. I remember working for a boss who would say, hey, Mike, great job. And the first few times made me feel good. But then it became such a routine thing that I started to wonder, boy, is there really that intention behind it? So it's important to praise or compliment. We just need to balance that. Help create purposeful work. Again, people want to have purpose. They want to have that belongingness. So how do we help them see and create work that they really see purpose in what they're doing? Again, where's the benefit, whether to the organization, to themselves, or to others in the organization? We can help to motivate them by helping them to develop new skills and actively involve them in that, so that they can, as I like to say, put their fingerprint on it. It builds ownership. And when they have ownership, when people have ownership, they're driven to really be successful and achieve the challenges out in front. And last, but certainly not least, believe in them and demonstrate that belief. Show that you have confidence. That boosts their motivation, their energy to be successful for multiple reasons. So it's just some things that you can think about doing as a leader to create that environment to motivate your employees. And oftentimes, you know, I'll throw a matrix out, and there's nothing special to this one, but you can think about employees. If you tie all of the topics we've hit this morning, you know, you can think about the employees on the left. Where do you think they are in terms of skill and will? What observations have you made that you can see the energy in them? Questions you might want to pose to them, different motivators that you've observed or seen in them, or have learned from dialogue. And, you know, what are the things that motivate them in terms of recognition? And obviously the expectation piece. So just kind of pulling all of those different pieces together to help you with a framework for boosting motivation in your employees. So with that, I'll just kind of summarize. You know, again, motivation to me is really, you've got to know your employees. You've got to understand what's valuable to them. And remember, what's valuable to me is not necessarily valuable or important to them. I is not equal to we. Expectations are play a key role. They can motivate as well as demotivate. And then again, I fall back a lot on the expectancy theory in terms of expectancy, instrumentality, and balance. If I work hard, I can meet the objective. If I meet the objective, I'll be rewarded. And the reward that I will get is of value to me. So that concludes what I wanted to share and bring out into today's webinar. And at this point, I'll open it up for questions. Patrick?
Okay, yeah, we have some good questions coming in, so let's get going. How do I keep employees motivated when they feel they are not being utilized to their fullest potential?
Excellent question. That ties right back to, you know, the needs about reaching your full potential or self-actualization. I think again, a key piece is I think we have to be able to give them very clear feedback, and it ties into expectations as well. What do they think is their full potential? I've been in situations where a person may say, you know what, I should be plant manager now. And perhaps they have 2 years experience as being an engineer, and you're saying, okay, well, let's talk about what it takes to be a successful plant manager, and help them to see where there are development opportunities, because in one essence, their view of their full potential may not necessarily be accurate. So again, we have to be able to have those difficult conversations, and we have to be able to give them clear expectations about what it takes to reach or be successful in that role. So I think it really comes down to a dialogue, and it comes down to being able to give feedback and have those difficult conversations. And if their expectations or what they view as their full potential is accurate, for lack of a better term, then it's about, okay, now how do we position them there? And perhaps maybe a different person was chosen this time. And so there's just maybe some skill gaps that we need to build. So I think we really need to have a clear framework around those expectations and be able to have that dialogue, even if it's a difficult one. Great question.
Okay, great. Next question. How do I motivate employees that are always controversial and debate everything?
Those are the fun ones. Again, I think it comes down to, you know, being able to have that dialogue, and they're controversial, they're debate, and we as leaders need to be able to share with them how that debating is coming across. You know, sometimes those debates are valid, or those moments of being controversial or disagreeing are valid, and we need to give that validity to them. But there are times, and at least I'm thinking the question's coming from this direction, there are times, and I can think about people in my past who were always that challenging person, maybe even a little bit of a Debbie Downer or Danny Downer, in that we need to be upfront with them. We need to be able to handle that, manage that conflict, and again, have that difficult conversation. And so I think if we're upfront with them and we understand, they understand where we're coming from, and we continue to get aligned on, you know, what's important to them. Is it just important for them to challenge all the time to make sure that you as the leader are making the quote unquote right or best decision? Be open to that conversation, but also be able to manage that conversation, not in a way that shuts them down, but in a way that makes that dialogue, that challenge, or that debate meaningful and fruitful. We're not always right as leaders, even though we want to believe that we're the leader, therefore we do everything right. We're not always right, and a good challenge as a leader is a very worthwhile experience. And I think we need to welcome those challenges and debates and be open to them, because I think that's where we learn, and that's where people begin to feel that ownership. And out of some of those dialogues and conversations, your decision as a leader may in fact change. Well, if they see that your decision changed as a result of their input, I would contend that they will become less confrontational and debate, and whatever the adjective is for debate, because now they're being heard, they're being understood. And again, they want to have a sense of that achievement, a sense of that belonging, and be able to have some input and ownership. Great question.
Okay, another good one coming in. What do you do when a person is hard to read as far as what motivates them?
Behaviors and emotions can be hard to read. The old poker face. Again, I think being upfront, and this comes down to effective communications, being able to communicate effectively. And when you're in a situation where, as I commented, people having a good poker face and you can't tell whether they're energized or de-energized, I think putting that on the table is very effective. I can't, and I'll use you, Patrick, as an example, or at least just as a name. Patrick, I can't tell, based on the look on your face and your body language, I can't tell if you're agreeing with that or disagreeing with that. Can you clarify that for me? So you're putting it out on the table, and not in a way that is directly putting the person on the defensive, but you're letting them know that you're not sure where they stand. Help me to understand where you stand, because I can't tell just based on this interaction. So you're just putting yourself out there and allowing them to clarify where they stand, what their position is, and I think that can help in that situation. Another good question.
Okay, I think we have time for just one more. How do you motivate a new employee, like one that is fresh out of school, who wants to be in control but can't handle the simple task in front of them, like they think it's beneath them?
I think that's another good challenging question, especially, I noticed later in my career where there were people say, well, I've been here 2 years, I should be blankety blank title, whatever role. I've been here 2 years. And in your mind, or at least in my mind, in those situations, like, wait a minute, most people getting to that role, they're not there until they've had 5 years of experience. And it's not just the number of years, but it's the types of experiences. So again, I think that, and this actually reminds me of an employee or a team member of mine when I was in Tennessee. There is work associated with every job that we don't like to do. It's boring. It could be, what's the word I'm looking for? Menial, or even administrative in style. And I think having that clear conversation that not all of the work we do is fun, exciting, fresh, out on the forefront, setting the future, but there are some tasks that we need to do in our role that we're responsible for that can be more menial in nature. And I think that upfront conversation, again, coming back to being an effective communicator, that conversation and that dialogue to help set the expectations straight is key. And as we look at different generations in the workforce, which is a interesting factor now, I think we have 5 different generations in the workforce. There are some generalizations about the different generations that we need to be aware of. And again, it comes back to understanding and knowing your employees and being able to set and clarify clear expectations, whether it be for a role that they think they should take on or even for the current role that they're in. Great question.
Okay, great. Well, that's all the time we have for questions. So that does conclude our time together. We would like to thank all of you for attending today and encourage you to register for Mike's upcoming programs. which are Motivating Employees, which will be live over Zoom on October 12th and 13th. And we also will have an in-person session for this on November 9th at the Educational Service Center in Independence. Also his Managing Discipline program on October 26th and 27th, which is over Zoom. And also December 7th, which again is in person in Independence. You can register at our website at www.kent.edu/yourtrainingpartner, or you can contact us to learn more about these programs and all of our other offerings at 330-672-3416.
Sorry.
That's all right. And we also, you can join our extensive list of clients and bring Kent State to your organization. All of our programs can be customized and delivered virtually or at your location. We also, all of our fall 2021 programs are scheduled and can be registered for at this time. We also encourage you to register for our next webinar on Friday, July 16th, when we will be discussing managing transition and embracing change during challenging times with Kent State Facilitator Christy Frieden. During this webinar, you will learn about the change process, understand the important distinction between change and transition, learn a model that will assist you in dealing with the stressors in your life and techniques for relieving stress, learn key aspects of adaptability and how to reframe a challenge into an opportunity, and also develop your role as a change agent in your organizations. Registration for that will be opening next week. For those of you attending live, you will be asked to complete a short survey. Please complete this survey so that we can be assured that we are bringing you the most usable and relevant content possible. You will also receive a follow-up email early next week with a link to view a recording of today's webinar. On behalf of Kent State Center for Corporate and Professional Development and our presenter, Mike Rooney, thank you for attending today and have a great weekend.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, folks.